comic relief in the group and made an effort to always be sarcastic and pull funny jokes and pranks on others. They all loved to hate him sometimes. However, most of the time they just simply loved him for who he was. And with that they pressed onwards towards the large ruins of a destroyed city that lied ahead. Only the leader knew what might await them there, but he wasn't sure. He had not spoken much during the journey from the land south of Valcrest, only short commands to turn right or left, or to wait to the rest during the entire trip. He was deep in his own thoughts, and many questions troubled his mind, questions he could not answer himself, or ask his companions about. He had to see the answers himself to know if they were true or not. They were closing up the ruins by now, and soon enough they would reach its gates and confirm one of the leader's first questions. Were these ruins still inhabited by a hostile cult, or had others moved in since he was here last time? The company reached the closed gates, and there they stopped abruptly. Nothing was said as all of them scanned the high walls that protected the ruins inside, and nothing yet confirmed if there was still a threat to be dealt with here. The last time he had been here, he had been close to dying from that crazed cult, but this time he was prepared, and he was stronger than he had ever been before. The leader of the group led his horse forward a few more steps and cleared his rusty throat. "Is anyone home?" The man began to shout with his firm voice, but nothing happened, not a single response, and the gates remained shut. "We seek a place to rest for the night and some food and water for our journey ahead. I give you my word that we will not disturb you more than we already have." The leader continued, and after waiting long enough, he was about to turn his horse around to take off when the gates suddenly opened slowly and 6 armed men and women walked out with their weapons leveled. The other party members in the group were about to arm themselves as well, but their leader only had to wave his hand at them to make them stop. When the 6 mercenaries, from the looks of it, had cornered the group of 4, a woman walked out from the open gates. The leader noticed her gracefully light brown hair and her almost stunning golden eyes as she seemed to watch the odd group in front of her with great care. She also seemed unarmed. That meant she put much trust and confidence in her soldiers' ability to kill the group standing before her if things went out of hand. That, or she had a better plan up her sleeves. Before the woman could say anything, the leader of the group took his chance to speak before being warned not to speak. "I wish to speak with your leader about things of the past and things yet to come," he explained firmly, and remained still on his trusted horse. He didn't mind the situation they were in, and he knew that he could kill the men and women around him in a heartbeat if he so wished to. It was not confidence, nor was it arrogance, but pure fact that allowed him to believe such a thing. In his time away from Valcrest, he had learned a couple of martial arts that many of the people in this land had never seen, and his gained knowledge he didn't possess before. This, and he now also had his beloved enlightenment once more, the ability to control the very earth and stones around him and others. The mercenaries finally began to study the man who had spoken after wrestling their eyes away from his mysterious companions. Upon further inspection, they saw that the leader of this odd company wore almost the same robes as the young girl behind him, but his robes were also filled with leather and fur. They clearly saw that his knee pads, chest, and shoulders were heavily reinforced with thick steel. The white mask with red and black patterns concealed his face, and dark brown hood from his dark brown robes covered his head. By the left side of his waist, a sharp and long sword hung firmly, ready to be used against anything or anyone who dared to come in its way. They couldn't see if he had any other weapons upon him, other than the sword and the crossbow hanging on his back, but they were all sure that he had more in store for anyone who dared to face him than the eye could see. And now, the man awaited the woman's response. Wolf-pack encampment. Out in the large woods of Valcrest, a young man slowly patrolled the perimeter of the large camp lying nearby. The wind touched a part of his face that wasn't covered by his white-colored bandana. His eyes, both of them, had the color of green, with a slight touch of crimson in them. One of his eyes was the same as anyone else's, but his other eye, the one of the left side of his face, was marked with a scar he made himself in his youth. It was not on purpose, but it was still more of a lesson than an accident if you'd ask him. The man walked steadily upon the dusty road, and without any fear of being ambushed by either animal or people alike. He knew of his surroundings, and it was almost as if he could feel the very heartbeats of every living thing around him, even though it was literally impossible of him. The wind continued to caress his eyes as he moved onwards on the dusty road leading through the dark forest. His left hand twitched furiously from time to time, a gift he had earned from fighting that wretched Evan Banna a year ago, just outside the camp he lived in. He swore that he would one day find the man and kill him for himself, but for now, thoughts of revenge and justice would just have to wait. The man suddenly left the forest behind and found himself walking towards a lake that lay just on the outskirts of the camp. Upon reaching it, the man knelt down and took a sip of the fresh water before taking a seat against the nearby tree. It was quiet here. No sound of the wind, the animals, not even any sound of anything human at all. He liked the silence, and he enjoyed every second of it, but he didn't get much rest these days. There was also something to be done around the camp, and when he had nothing to do in the camp, he had a great target to assassinate in one of the cities of Velcrest. The life of an assassin was never a calm one, and always putting those who lived in it on the edge. The assassin suddenly pulled out one of the quarterstaff attached to his back and slammed the bottom of it into the ground softly. He caused 4 curved blades to slash out from the staff on each side of it, and blood dripped from each of them. The assassin had just recently returned from assassinating an entire family, a father, a mother, and their old son. They had not only had a bounty on their heads, but were also the ones who had caused several other families to starve to death, while they lived rich and happy lives in New Haven. Such an act would not go unpunished, and the assassin made sure to leave no witnesses to his little visit. He took out a small and somewhat dirty piece of cloth and began to clean his weapon from all the blood. From the beginning, it had only been a simple quarterstaff, to be used as a weapon to disarm his enemies, knock them out, or use it with his enlightenment. But recent years have proved to be useful in combat against enemies he only wished death for, and thus he had modified his own weapon to suit his own needs. After he was done, he slammed the bottom end of the weapon against the ground once more, and the blades returned into their places of the quarterstaff. Just as he was about to rise from the sitting position, he heard an all too familiar voice behind him. It was the voice of his leader, and his best friend of the clan. It was Sean. "Hey, Avius," he said, and the man named Avius rose at last from sitting at the tree to greet his friend. "Hello, Sean. What do I owe this pleasure?" Avius responded and studied the man from before him to see if it brought good or bad news, or if he just wanted to know how things had gone with the assassination. Avius knew many things about Sean, and that included how to spot what kind of mood his best friend was in at the time. The Western Plains, close to the ruins. Out in the edges of Valcrest, by the western plain, a large and mystical creature moves slowly, following the wind and the many sounds that this land has to offer. The creature's red eyes dart from one place to the other, always making sure that it's not being watched by anyone or anything. It's not as if it cares if someone finds out that it finally, after 3 years, returned to Valcrest, but it wants to be sure it is supposed to be ready for an ambush, or not once it reaches the woods. Nothing is yet in sight, but the creature remains low and slow as it continues to stalk its way towards the edges of the forest ahead. The creature itself is very large. Its thick skin is colored black as the night itself, and its red eyes can change from red, yellow, or black. Spikes are part of its body are sticking up ahead and here and there, and its long and sharp fangs are always visible from its half-open mouth. Long and purple hair hangs from its head down to the shoulder length. Its giant hands have 4 sharp claws on it, and every time it takes a step in the dirty ground, a mark is set. The creature leaves a trail behind itself, but it doesn't mind it since it knows that it can handle anything that would even dare to attack it. During these 3 years away from Valcrest, the beast has grown so much stronger from the last time it was seen within the walls of New Haven, fighting the White Knight Captain and almost defeating the Black Knight Captain after a long fight. It would have slain her if it had not been for one little detail. The man the creature's soul had possessed was still very much alive inside it, and had forced it to flee the battlefield. Over the years, the man inside the beast has grown weaker, and these days he doesn't show himself much, and rather let the beast rule his thoughts and his actions. Even though the creature's size would deem it impossible to remain stealthy, the beast melted in the shadows of the very moment it entered the forest, and if anyone had seen it, they would claim that it simply disappeared into thin air. Something strange was happening in Velcrest, and someone, or something even more sinister, was making plans behind the very eyes of the gods themselves, as the war between the city of Blackpond and the city of New Haven was starting to reach its climax. Assassin's Camp. Sheen had a busy morning. Busy. Another group of mercenaries had been caught hunting on their territory. The man was slightly disappointed to discover Allison was not amongst them at this time. Perhaps Crystal had something to do with that. The archer hadn't been spotted in the territory ever since her former recruit was executed. Sheen thought he would drive her out of her cautious attitude with that, but it didn't work. It was a pity, too, because he knew that if he managed to get to Allison, he could easily reach Chris through her. The blind woman had simply made herself disappear ever since he defeated her in camp 3 years ago. Unlike the other traitors who had invaded the territory and committed vengeful acts against him and the clan, Chris hadn't showed herself. It was a pleasant thought to him that maybe she had given up and retired, but that was unlikely. Being an assassin was all she knew. The clan was all she knew, and Chris wouldn't walk away like this. For that reason, the silence wasn't settling. As the active that had been reporting to him finished the accounts of how they had scared the mercenaries away, Sean nodded at the man as to show he understood and waved him away without a word. These events had become ordinary now, so much that Sean had little to say in response to the man, sitting back in his wooden chair and looking around the leader's cabin. If those walls could speak, Sean imagined what kind of stories they would be able to give. That house had seen so much, survived so much. The place was in itself a piece of history. The past 3 years had been complicated. First was the cleaning and rebuilding of the camp, then there was the death of the Blackpond ruler that set things back a little bit. Turns out, as much as Sheen hated to admit it, Chris had a point. Sheen had no idea who the new king was or where he had come from. While he was able to keep a mutually respectful relationship with Rory, this so-called son of his was another story, and Sean decided to keep his distance from Blackpond except if the new king decided to call upon one of the favors he owed. Then he would, of course, keep his word and answer whatever requests the man had. A deal is a deal. Sean, an active, called, entering the cabin and taking a small bow. Yes, Alex, what is it? Sean asked, turning his attention towards the young man. Dante already came back from his assignment. You had asked me to let you know, remember? Oh, right. Thank you, Alex. At your service, the active responded, walking out back to his duties. Sean smiled as the active left the cabin, waiting a few moments before leaving himself. He didn't need to ask if Alex knew where Avius was. He knew exactly where to find his friend, and as he walked in the direction of the lake, he simply nodded, in acknowledgement as some people told him good morning. Even if Sean's demeanor had changed very little with the new title, the man had become a little more introspective than he was as a simple active, keeping his thoughts to himself and always measuring his words. Those who knew him longer had noticed that change, but then, leading the wolf pack was no easy task. As he reached the lake, Sean found Avius sitting there as he suspected he would be. Hey, Avius, Sean greeted simply, walking over and leaning against one of the trees. Hello, Sean. Of what do I owe the pleasure? The man responded, watching him. Sean had to let a chuckle escape him at the words. He didn't think anyone would have seen his presence as a pleasure. It was a little bit funny. Finally, he sat down at the edge of the lake by himself. Damn busy morning, Sean stated in a wary voice. Mercenaries invading again. although Allison wasn't with them this time. He chuckled. I think she just doesn't love me anymore, he stated sarcastically. Or maybe she thought I would take it easier